Hey, good morning. Today we're going to look at practice 14.1, completing the square, and I'm going to do a couple of examples for you so that hopefully that helps with when I'm going to do some of the odds and you're going to do some of the evens or all the evens, and hopefully this helps for you to complete the packet. Completing a square is we're trying to make the expression that they give us, or the part of an expression that they give us, become a perfect square trinomial so that it will factor into a binomial squared. In other words, we want to find out what number right here will let us factor into a binomial square like that. Real simple. Finding that value is not hard at all. All you do is you take half of this middle term, the linear term, the term with just the x with the variable. In our case, that's negative 16c. You take half of that, or divide it by 2. So if we take our negative 16 and we divide it by 2, that's negative 8. And then we square that, or we multiply it by itself. So negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. So positive 64 is that number that we need to make that a perfect square trinomial. And then when we factor it, it factors into the square root of the first term, so the square root of x squared, the square root of the last term that we just came up with, that's 8, and then we use the middle term's sign, or the coefficient, the sign of the coefficient of the middle term. So, and I know that's more information than what it asks for. It just asks for what's the value of c that completes the square. That's going to be 64, but then later on it's going to ask you to factor it. So I just went ahead and did that as well. So on number 3 here, we take half of negative 36. That's negative 18. We square it. If you're doing that in a calculator, make sure you put that in parentheses like that. And I'm pretty sure that that's 324. Let me check and make sure that's right. 18 times 18 is 324. That's right. So that's the value you're looking for. So as I was saying, and when we get down here to the other part of the problems, the other part of the worksheet, the different problems down here, now it asks me to solve the equation by completing the square. So that's a little bit different. When we solve by completing the square, we first want to make our problem look like the problems did from up above. So whatever our constant term is, we want to get rid of that, take it to the other side, so that all we have is this piece right here. So in this case, we're going to add 91 to both sides. And when we add 91 to both sides, we're going to get that. And now I'm trying to find what number goes here that I can complete the square, like we did up above. Remember where we took half of that middle term and squared it? Okay. So if we do that, half of that middle term, half of 6n is 3, and 3 squared is 9. And because I added 9 to the left-hand side of the equation, I also have to add 9 to the right-hand side of the equation. And so that gives me this new equation, like that. And just as I showed you previously up there above, we factor that trinomial, that perfect square trinomial. We do that by taking the square root of the first term, the square root of the last term, and we use the sign of the middle term. And we put our 2 on the outside. So this perfect square trinomial factors into the binomial square like that. I haven't done anything with my 100, so it copies. Now, once we get here, then we're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of that that binomial squared is just going to take the parenthesis and the square part off, so I get n plus 3. And then the square root of 100 is positive or negative 10, because 10 times 10 is 100. Negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. So now to figure out what my value of n is, I just set up these two equations, n plus 3 equals 10, and n plus 3 equals negative 10. That's what this means. So on the left-hand side over here, the n plus 3 equals 10. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides and get 7. And on the right-hand side, I'll do the same. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, but this time I get n equals 13. So there's my two answers, n equals 7 and n equals, negative 13. My bad, negative 10 subtract 3 is negative 13. So the correct answer is A. All right, let me go to the back side. Maybe. There we go. And let's do number 7. So again, I'm going to move that constant term, and I move that negative 80 by adding 80 to both sides. Now I'm going to complete the square. I'm going to figure out what goes here, and because it's an equation, whatever I add to the left, I got to add to the right. Remember to find that. We take half of our middle term, so half of that is 1, and then I square it, so it's still 1, because 1 times 1 is 1. So I get a squared minus 2a plus 1 equals 81. The thing on the left is a perfect square trinomial. It factors into a binomial square. So remember, I take the square root of the first term, the square root of the last term, and I use the middle term sign. All right, this is where we take the square root of both sides. So the square root of that binomial square just gets rid of the parentheses and the square, so I get to a minus 1. On the right-hand side, 81 is positive 9 times positive 9, as well as negative 9 times negative 9. So then I have my two equations. And when I solve my two equations by adding 1 to both sides of the equations, I get positive 10 and negative 8. Hope that helps.